Well, obviously I'm going to be excited because I'm going to get more out of the Scooby-Doo genre, right? Just because I'm that nerd that wants to do fun things. But I think because the nerd in me loves design, the challenge is whatever that is. So if it is real, there's a challenge to working that out and working within whatever constraints we have.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Hollywood Unveiled, where we pull back the curtain on the Hollywood entertainment industry and get to know the people and stories behind the magic. I'm Jake.
And I'm Logan.
And Logan, our guest today is Shelley Wallace, who's been making television and film projects come to life as an art director and set designer in the entertainment industry for the past 28 years. She's been an integral part of designing numerous television shows such as Moesha, The Agency, Leverage, The Office, and the current CBS drama SEAL Team and Black Mafia Family on Starz. Her film credits include Tuskegee Airmen, Mr. Deeds, Aquila and the Bee, and Kong Skull Island. She's currently a member of the Art Directors Guild, the ADG, Board of Directors, Set Design Council, as well as the ADG IATSE National Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committees. And it was a blast talking with her.
She's great. We were kind of lamenting off mic that the level of nerd that she brought to this interview was very appreciated. Sometimes we talk to people and we bring up a project that most audiences would be like, oh, that feels like I don't want to call it a paycheck thing, but a project where you're like, oh, that was the cheap one you had to do the real thing. And we bring it up with her and she's like, oh, I love doing that one. That one was a ton of fun because of this. And just, I love whenever people are just really passionate about what they've done over the years.
Oh, I've done so many projects that one might consider a bit lowbrow, but I had a blast doing myself. So it was an absolute blast talking with her. Had a great time. And why don't we just get into it, Logan?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Here's set designer Shelley Wallace. Shelley, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, I am honored to be here, Jake. Thanks for having me, Logan. A pleasure.
Happy to.
Well, you've got such an incredible filmography that we really wanted to dive into what you've done and where you've come from. And we especially want to know how you got started. I know you have an architectural background from Cornell. What drew you to the film industry and what were some of the major influences on you? Is there any particular films that really kind of screamed at you to get into the film industry?
It's not a typical lead-in for me. I think it was almost through osmosis. My grandmother came from a generation where movies were all the rage. And so she was a big fan of, Judy Garland. And then mom picked up that torch and was someone who had a great singing voice and would often say she would have maybe gone into entertainment if she hadn't married and had 4 kids, and just their enthusiasm mirrored with my dad, who was a big history buff. I think just the idea of entertainment, because we used to have the kind of family that did a lot of singing and just entertaining each other, sort of a big extended family. And it just became subconsciously probably something in my mind. But architecture was my chosen career path. So I ignored all the early introductions because I went to High School of Art and Design in New York City, which had a theater program. They had a video program. I was very focused on architecture the whole time. And it's ironic that I had no idea what production design was until I came to LA and was working as an architect and got laid off. And someone happened to say to me, who I was working with, have you ever considered production design? I'm going, what's that? So yeah, that's really what started the process. It really wasn't knowing in advance that this was a career path for me.
And with a background at Cornell, how does your academic training influence your approach to set design in the way you conceptualize a space?
Good question. Well, for me, obviously, I'm pretty detail oriented and research, right? So knowing my history of architecture, knowing and then including the sort of theatrical training of period design, now we're getting into the sci-fi realm, but still there are always echoes of certain design techniques that come from history. You really don't reinvent the wheel, no matter how futuristic we get. It's still based on some kind of traditional partie or concept. So, yeah, having had this very historically rigid training and design concept, it set me up well because Cornell's design program was much more about that and much more about theory than it was just sort of the nuts and bolts of engineering. So I had a fairly open palette of ideas leading into set design. Design was a strong part of my background.
And in coming from this architecture background where you have to design things to say city code and things like that, early in your career, I mean, like right when you got into it, did you ever find yourself over designing something or like at the beginning, like right when you started? Because I've seen situations where people build sets to code as opposed to, hey, that could just be a couple of flats.
Oh yeah, no, I was so scared and nervous of not being proficient in set design that I was architecturally designing. And that also meant taking too long because, the more you get into it, the more you're funneled into this like detail that you're so worried about. You end up over designing, of course. And it took time for me to understand that the most important thing is time. Everything is not an open field for creativity. This is the real world, even though it's entertainment. You still have budgets, you still have time constraints. And every genre, whether it's episodic or sitcom world, 3-camera world, or it's, features, has a different clock. And I think that took time and experience to understand how to move fluidly through that. But yeah, absolutely. The beginning was all about throwing all my stuff that I knew from architecture in there in hopes that it would cure all the other things I didn't understand. So yes, I think that's almost anybody coming in new. There's that tendency to focus on what you know and maybe overdo it a little bit.
Now, you're talking about hitting all these different genres. I'm also curious with this. How do you approach designing things with wildly different tones? Something like Rizzoli and Isles, which is supposed to be, relatively grounded in the real world, versus Scooby-Doo, Curse of the Lake Monster, where it's like live action cartoon.
I know.
Is there a different approach to designing with that kind of stuff?
Well, obviously I'm going to be excited because I'm going to get more out of a Scooby-Doo genre, right? Just because I'm that nerd that wants to do fun things. But yeah. I think because the nerd in me loves design, the challenge is whatever that is. So if it is real, there's a challenge to working that out and working within whatever constraints we have. And then, of course, there's the Scooby-Doo realm, which you think is unlimited, but it's definitely not. There's, a certain color palette and there's certain other criteria that you're limited to as well. So yeah, me, the designer, just comes at it as a designer, and I'm just hoping to get the opportunity to design because I'm not the production designer. So sometimes it's a limit of how much do I get to actually contribute, as opposed to, this is sci-fi versus this is historic.
And actually, on that, is there a particular set of rules you have to follow when you're designing on a show like The Office, where it's intentionally designed to be hyper realistic?
Yeah,
like as real, as least staged as it can be.
Yeah, not really. I mean, clearly, there were limits because there's only so much creativity, right? It's The Office. Every time they went out or had something outside of that, then we got to have fun. But you're always limited. You really are. I mean, that's probably the biggest misnomer is that there's some kind of wide open range of things you're entitled to do. I think that's the beauty of maybe the production designer's concept. It's all about their initial concept that you're realizing. It's very rare that you're going to have carte blanche to do it. And even the production designer is not going to have so much carte blanche. You can design something phenomenal and amazing, and then you have to sell it, and then you have to convince them, and then it's budget, and then it's, script and so on. So you're always a part of the team. You're always part of the negotiation about what can stay. So everybody's having to be a little less tight-fisted conceptually at every stage. You're always trying to mediate or negotiate for something that means the most. And that's really what ends up being the overarching story of any genre or any concept is, okay, what's really the thing you have to sell and sell them on? And then everything else you can kind of be a little looser and play with it. But we're held to a budget at the end of the day.
Well, on that note, now I'm curious, what was the last battle you fought for that you got something in for?
Okay. The last one? That's a tough one. I don't know.
Or
I
a
can't.
Or
favorite.
the one you're just the most proud of.
Oh, that was fun. Oh, that was fun. Believe it or not, it goes back a ways, way back. I had done a film that involved a cotton field. And I was, again, I'm this designer thinking, walls and floors and ceilings. And now I'm kind of I was wearing a different hat. I was an assistant art director. So I was tasked with this, empty field that had to become cotton at the wrong time of year. And it had to have a hero shot. And I was just so new and so scared. And, like you do, we were talking about over designing. Well, here's an example where it came through for me. It was a good thing. And I had to kind of, against all odds, make this happen 2 hours away from base camp. Everyone was going to show up that morning to do this opening shot of this film. And I had gone through, it was terrifying because I was in a state I wasn't that familiar with. I was driving 2 hours away from base camp to work with people speaking Spanish. My Spanish was piss poor. I'm trying to communicate, I'm hiring local farm workers, and, it was just amazingly overly wrought with complications, not to mention it was rainy season. So, managed to, after probably a week in advance, making this beautiful field of cotton, having found an old, some company that had some unharvested cotton that we glued back on the stalks. And it was a lot, maple leaves, and made it look great and tilled the land. Suddenly I'm a farmer. And the morning of the shot, I think it rained like a day before or something. We had gone back out and fixed it. But the morning of, everyone showed up, beautiful morning, sun is shining. And I can't tell you where this cloud came from, but as if it was on cue, it poured for about 20 minutes and drowned the cotton once again. And I thought, I'm done. I'm just getting started and my career is over. But it was the most beautiful moment because this was a low budget feature and everybody kind of hands on deck came and kind of, like hair, we just kind of put it back up and tried to fix it for the hero shot. And it was one of the most beautiful shots. Ended up being a money saver, and kudos came and all that. Happy ending. But I think I had about 10 heart attacks leading up to that moment. So I was pretty proud of that for sure. I don't think I was ever tested quite like that again at all. That was almost like the make or break moment to say, can you stay in this career? Can you make it? That was a moment I'm proud of. And it happened early.
And it's that trial by fire that makes you really decide, am I going to stay in this industry? I know a lot of people go through that. I want to go back to something that you mentioned about time management, because that's something that you have to really learn on the job in many ways. How much of that would you say the things you've learned about, whether it's time management, whether it's fixing a problem on set, how much would you attribute that to your mentor, William Newman?
Oh, Bill's wonderful. I can't give him credit for the time management. I give him credit for a lot of things, but like you said, that literally comes from being on the job, sitting in the chair, and then pacing and finding out where you need to step it up. But as you mentioned, Bill was the sort of like guru that mentally kept me hanging in there, because I would call him and like the daughter complaining about, dating. I'm like, every time I had a project, it was this new relationship and what wasn't working and whatever it was, he just was always, very patient and informative and encouraging. And it was what I needed. And I give him probably majority of the credit for me sticking it out in those early years because, again, it was the way he explained the lifestyle, the politics of getting along and making the team thing work. It's so it's so hard to explain to people. It's so surreal from the lay people. What's he really in this industry and the things we do? Because they're like, you had to do what? How many hours was that? And to do, you were making what? So it looks great in the end, but when you really break it down, sometimes it's why you don't always want everybody to see behind the curtain. They get a little too much information, then they start looking at you funny, like, and you gave up architecture for this, that kind of thing.
It's like anybody who's had a friend on set or brought a friend on set say, hey, I want to see what movies like. And then they're like, are you
Can I
going to do
go?
anything?
Yeah.
Can I go? Yeah.
All right. How soon can we get out of here? No,
Yeah.
I only show them the good stuff. I mean,
Oh,
because
yeah.
it's usually the bad stuff has already happened before they got there anyway,
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Or if you know it's down that hallway, you go the other way,
Yeah. Or when the bad stuff's about to happen, then they're like, oh, I'll stick around now. It's interesting.
Right. It's like, let's go to Crafty.
Yeah. You can't go wrong with Crafty. You just go there.
Yeah. Give them a little swag, But yeah, the time management, I don't think anyone can tell you. I don't think anyone can academically prepare you for that.
Mhm.
Because as I say, it varies from project to project, genre to genre. Some features give you plenty of time to work these things out. And, then you get on an episodic and it's like, you're not done yet. I just got here 5 minutes ago, So it's definitely going to be, again, that's the part that's hard to explain. And if I may just add this, I recently had a young friend who's also a set designer explaining the woes he had, explaining to his parents about this sort of slowdown of work because of the strikes and all this. And, he's newer in his career. So they were already looking at him like, why aren't you a lawyer like the rest of us? That kind of thing. So he's already the odd person out because he's a creative. And then he's got this industry that's very unpredictable. And now he's got to explain while he was riding high just a year ago, now is, crickets. And that was where I was like, well, if you need my help, I'm happy to talk to them about it. I've come through the first strike. I'm going to get through the second strike. Let me talk to him, But he figured it out. He figured out a way and was able to communicate with them and, kind of allay their fears. And I couldn't help but think, oh, my God, that's so familiar. I remember the moment when I had to do the same thing. It's like, it's going to be okay. You'll see.
Yeah. Was Bill there for you to in that same respect at an earlier time in your career?
Well, I think, yeah, in a way, because he was so inviting that he became like family. And I remember like having I think it might have been my birthday or some event. It was, my sister, my mom and I, and he came down with his son and it was like an uncle and a cousin. All of a sudden we're just all family hanging. And of course the conversation would lend itself to this industry. And then he would start talking about it. And I think, in his own way, he was kind of introducing and making my mom at least see that this is a lifestyle, this is a living. He had raised a family and made it through college and all those things with his kids. And she could probably pass that on to my dad. Yeah, it's going to be okay. It looks like it can be a viable industry, and she can actually make a living. So I think so. He did.
And it's an industry that is actively trying to get you to quit. Just constantly.
Yeah. You're just, it's just so much like you're always in boot camp. You're just always running the gauntlet. And you don't really, I think the one blessing, if there was anything from the strike or from COVID or whatever, the last few years, it's been the moment to stop and assess. What have you been doing? How bad has it? Have you really looked at your health lately? Are you okay? I think that was probably the gift that came out of all the other chaos was assessing, is this the path you still want to be on? Are you, because we just get into it. We just start rolling because it's what we do. And we don't feel we can stop, God forbid. But I've paid more attention to those who have pivoted or have stopped and come back or found another way. And I'm just like, those are all really viable and useful for one's sanity. So I kind of lean more into that, explaining to people that, this is what's nice about what we do. It doesn't have to be everything. It can be something, but it doesn't have to be everything.
Now, with so much of this job being research, how much of your time is just combing through historical photos or architecture books? And do you have a team that helps you manage all that?
Absolutely. Again, if it's a feature, you get a lot more time for that, which is so much fun. I mean, I love that. But you don't, again, depending on the genre, you don't always have as much time to do that. But it all hands on deck usually, because I'll have specific needs for my accuracy of detail. That's going to be important to me, but then graphics is looking at something else. And then visual effects will come in and have different needs. And what I liked about, like, at least on SEAL Team, it was wonderful because this was the first time I felt fully engaged with visual effects, because we didn't wait for posts. We had someone come and sit down. We'd have these art department meetings. They made sure they were in the production meetings, and there was much more interplay with the department. with all the people within the art department, so that we were all one. Usually you think, oh, they're a different department altogether, but it was all part of the art department. And that makes a big difference in expediting anything that comes up, because you've got that relationship. It's not like, who do we call for that? What is their schedule? Are they coming through? No, we have that straight path to speak with the people who are just outside of the immediate art department. Their office was right there, set dressings there, right there. So research wise, we would have, the whole team create boards. You've probably been in art departments where the walls are littered with all the research. And then from there, some of that goes to a presentation to the producers, the director. It gets signed off on, and then we're off and running. But it's always there, inspiring, always up and present throughout the whole episode or production, depending on which format you're working in. It should be a bigger part. I wish it were a bigger part. But again, I think features has the luxury of that time.
It's one of my favorite parts is researching things. It's just, you could go down the rabbit hole for a good long while.
I know, it's so much fun. Yeah. And of course, some of my favorite projects are period pieces, because of that.
Oh, yeah.
You get to live it. You don't just research it. You're actually, right in it the whole time. It can be a lot of fun, and it's educational.
What's up, everyone? I'm just dropping in to say thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. And if you're enjoying the show, be sure to let us know. If you're on YouTube, that means hitting like and subscribe. And if there's somebody you think we have to have on the show, or maybe there's a movie you want us to pull the curtain back on, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear about it. And if you're listening on the other platforms, please be sure to give us a rate and review. It really helps. Now, back to the show. And as a part of the process, I mean, you've worked with cultural icons like Sarah Finney Johnson. How do you approach designing spaces that reflect and enhance the cultural significance of the stories you're telling?
Glad you asked that. I didn't know you knew Sarah.
Not personally, but I'm familiar.
No, but she's wonderful. I mean, I have such nostalgia for Moesha, because that was sort of I cut my teeth, as they say. That was the beginning of union work for me. And it lasted quite a while. And it was so rewarding, because I think I was cocooned in a sense at that point, because they were so already like industry tough and knew what they were up against with this little engine that could. It was a new network. It was a new show. They were untested as producers. So there was that sort of protective sense they had for their entire production. And so I was a lot freer spirit as I worked on episodes about jazz, or episodes where we had Maya Angelou come through, or, a political episode, we had senators come through. So suddenly we were just in this like little, Moesha University, which brought in historical musical icons. We were going to do an episode with Prince at one point. That's always been one of those things that to this day, it just angers me to no end that they didn't offer to give him what he asked, which was just to pay his band. They didn't want to pay for his band. And I'm like, oh, but this is what we were able to do. It wasn't just do your job and get it done week to week. We had, this wonderful communion of creatives come through, historic icons, political icons. And it was just thanks to Sarah and Ralph Farquhar and Vita Spears, the three executive producers. They had this wonderful tie to history, and recognizing that at that moment we were poised as African Americans to do something we hadn't been afforded before, And I know we're not supposed to say his name, but Cosby got to open the door. In the 90s was a really rich time for people of color to have opportunities to be in the mainstream. And so that's why my timing couldn't have been better. So I hope I answered your question, because they laid the groundwork to make it easy for me. I didn't have to fight to make that part of the story or in the design of whatever space we were in. As I went forward, though, and I went into more episodic, it became a little more challenging. It depends on what it is, but it definitely will always be challenging in this industry, because it's not as open as I would have liked it to be when it comes to the cultural representation. You really have to kind of go out on a limb and fight for certain things to be seen and heard in a certain way. And it gave me a false sense of confidence going forward maybe not false. Maybe it should have been that way. But they helped build up my sense of, opening my mouth, just to add to that. Like, it wasn't a design issue, but it was a script issue. And I remember making a point of saying something on one of the shows I was working on because something subtly racist that was a script issue. And
Oh boy.
again, I'm in the art department, right? That's not my area, but I was there, and it was incumbent upon me to make sure I brought it to the attention of the script coordinator, and I'm very happy that I did, because it did change, and it never made it to air, and I was grateful. It was something you'd think, oh, well, that's not your area, stay in your lane, but sometimes having had some time in and seeing how it should be, and finding your voice, it doesn't matter. You are a representative of what they're saying, so your voice is that's why it's so important to be in the room. These are moments that they're teachable moments.
Well, speaking of being that voice in the room, as the first African-American woman set designer for Local 847, I'm sure you've seen many firsts in the industry come far later than one might hope for. And considering industry politics, systemic inequality, what keeps you motivated through all of the challenges and barriers that have come your way?
I'm always, because I had a mentor, because I had people who came before me in other areas, and even in this industry, I always feel compelled to do the same, that I get the most fulfillment knowing that I can pass that on to somebody who is going through it. And sadly, it's not that different than it was when I started. So, I get very involved with DEI. I get very involved with education, training, outreach with nonprofit for foster youth. And, I had a friend say, how do you find the time for all that? But to me, I do what I do now so that I can afford, I have, the time, and it gives me the right or the time to put into the things that I want, having done this and become someone that's a rarity. It almost feels incumbent upon me to make it my business to reach back. And it's not always formal. It's not always in a formal setting. Sometimes it's as simple as somebody just got hired and they're new and they're uncertain, and I just take them aside and have a conversation, and even that is huge. And that's what's so compelling for me and keeps me motivated, because the job is never done. There's, we still have a long way to go. And so every time that I'm in that space where somebody needs to be educated in a nice way, because we have plenty of people who are what I call tentative allies. They're just a little uncertain, and they don't know that they should speak. We've made it so very compartmentalized. You're either for it or against it. And it's like, no, there's so many more ways people need understanding. So, I like to be that person. I like to be that person in the mix for those who really want to know, I'm happy to explain it. And for those who don't want to know, I'm happy to ignore you, and work around you.
Fair.
Yeah. But I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it done. I'll let you know that much. It's not a matter of you're shutting me down. I'm here. And so while I'm here and I can't be ignored, it's not like anyone can mistake me for anybody else. I'm definitely going to speak to that truth. I wish there were more of me who make the time to do that, because it is a big time commitment and it can be exhausting. So I get it. I was that person when my mentor was trying to get me to do it. So I get it. But I feel like I don't want my time here to have been in vain, that I retire and I look back and I don't see anyone like me. Mm-hmm. So, and then they don't have to look exactly like me. They could just be anybody who access was denied or made extra difficult, And so I'm very protective of people who I find don't feel they have a voice. I like to help people find that voice.
Well, you also mentioned just now about working with foster children, especially. Looking back at your journey and the doors that were open for you, how do you see your role in opening the doors for them, for that next generation? And is that something that you strive for as a board member for Kids in the Spotlight?
Yeah, absolutely. It's ironic because when I was a very little girl, I had a little girlfriend we were about 7. And told me she was adopted. And I was like, what's that? and it was just left a seed, I guess, that I thought when I got older, I would adopt. That was a big thing. And thanks to me and my career and my focus, it never happened. But I think then years later, my oldest sister fostered and then adopted a little girl who's now a mother of two and doing very well. But, it was one of those themes that just kept coming up, and it was always sort of external. And then a dear friend of mine started this nonprofit, Kids in the Spotlight, and it's pathways for the foster youth to tell their stories. It's sort of a way of therapy, but it's also a career path. And of course, by telling their stories through film, we expose them to opportunities to be future writers, directors, producers, production designers. And so clearly, as a board member of KITS, I have the advantage of being, front and center for this beautiful program that started in 2009. And now we've come so far. And of course, I was always being able to contribute to the sort of the hidden part of that component, which was the design component. And then in 2003, we were able to open the doors to our own studio. And that's where I got to shine. And suddenly I was able to design the permanent sets and help with managing or maintaining those sets and bringing people to KITS. So yeah, that finally I felt like I even had another motivator to keep me inspired, another thing that connected me, for what I do and how it can be of a help to the the future designers, future storytellers.
You said in 2003 or 2023? Is this the new studio that was opened up in Van Nuys?
2023. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. We had a ribbon cutting. I believe that was just a year ago. It feels longer.
I saw the video of the facility. It looks amazing.
Yeah, it's so exciting. And, thank goodness, we have a wonderful CEO, Taiji Charity. And as I say, she was a good friend of mine, and we were partnered together through our church many years ago. And we've just maintained this wonderful, sisterhood and friendship. And, I always say I'm the wayward the wayward daughter, because I kind of was involved at the very beginning, then got caught up with the strike and not working and trying to find my way, and pulled away and then came back. And then it's like so much has transpired over the last decade that it warms my heart. And I find there are always opportunities to connect what I do with them with what I do professionally. And it's nice to know I have that, ability, because that's usually the missing link with a lot of nonprofits. You have people who might know finance, you might have some people who know, the theatrical side of it, but now you're pulling in all the crew and the below the line talent. I hate that term.
We're not a below any line.
That's right. I made that line.
Right. You designed it.
That's right. Who does straighter lines than us?
Now, I'm also curious, when you're designing for a show, because you're coming up with some fun stuff, is there an Easter egg or like a signature thing you always try to work into every project you do?
I wish I could say yes, but I can't, because it's such a variety of projects that I wish there was some signature thing I can say, did you see it? Did you see it?
On that note, is it not one thing you try to do, but like, is there just on every project, there's a little, maybe something new or something like that?
Without a doubt. Yeah. I mean, you're trying your best to make it more exciting for you. I mean, and here we go back to the sort of limitations of what we can and can't get away with. I mean, obviously as a production designer, like I did with KITS, you have got a complete empty slate. You're going to fill that space and you're going to make it work. And that's beautiful, because, even if it's just per se an apartment or a courtroom, you're still tasked with making this believable, making this workable, making it desirable for someone to rent. And there's gratification on that end of it. But the sort of thing you speak about with these little Easter eggs, these little special design things, yeah, I think that gets more, again, if you're fortunate enough to get on like a feature or a long-running series that you're designing their concepts, that's where you get into those unique pieces that you can say, well, I'm responsible for that look. Ultimately, the company gets the trademark. But, yeah. A good friend of mine recently passed away, but he had designed the original logo for Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, which became a signature at the beginning opening credits. And, that's a thing. That's something that was part of his dossier to say he did that. So, I mean, these are the kind of things that, I guess like graphic artists can take pride in when it's like a signature logo or a certain look that goes with a certain, like, I don't know if you were, like you said, the Scooby-Doo thing or something, or Star Trek, and you had something to do with the Enterprise, or, these are things where you really, put a feather in your cap. I think mine are a bit more all over the place. I can't, point to any one design.
All over the place is fine.
Yeah, it suits my personality.
Yeah. Well, speaking for myself, I did manage to sneak my daughter's name on a Netflix series to replace a sign that they couldn't get clearance for in the background. So,
that's all. Oh, see, now you've piqued my memory. I didn't think of it that way, but early on when I was doing a lot of low budget features, it was always, particularly period features. I love taking old family photos and sticking them on the dresser. I did a lot of that. I've done that throughout my career. That's probably one of my Easter eggs for sure. I also was very proud when one episode of The Parkers, we did a Negro League baseball episode. And one of my uncles was a Negro League baller. So his photo was prominently featured at the end as they did like a fade in and out of different players, and that's always made me proud because I've got family, who tune in just because they know that might happen. They're not watching anything else. They're just waiting for that moment,
Of course, yeah.
And those are the simple Easter eggs I've tried to, take advantage of on sets, especially if they're like, oh, it's an African American family. Really? And what era is that? Let me just go get some pictures. Yeah, it's funny. I've been asked things like, we had a crypt and we needed names, and I, of course, dug up the old relatives.
Yeah.
And use their names on crypts, it's like, oh, there's grandma, and it may sound morbid, but I'm like, I'm sure she's smiling.
Hey, what better way to preserve the memory?
That's right. This little fun little, I guess we all have a little quirky side that does things like that.
Well, I'm just curious as a VFX guy myself, you bringing up the interdepartmental coordination, any frustrations that can kind of come from either a lack of communication or communication that could be better or anything like that between the other departments? Yeah,
I think that's the hard part when everything gets kind of farmed out, so to speak. When you have an outside visual effects that doesn't have the internal relationship, then you've got a time lapse in communication, or you're trying to email communication, or time is lost, communication is lost because we don't have that old school all for one, all together in the space, working together. And I think that is the frustration, because now, you're trying to be creative with how to get that communication in a timely manner. And it's just another bump in the road to that final thing, especially when things change so quickly. We're shooting that, scene up next. Oh, no, we need a cover set. We're not doing that one now. Wait, we've changed it. We're going to do something else with that. And all this is happening in real time. And now you've got to double time it to get to, the outside vendors to make sure they know that we're making these adjustments, and you don't waste their time coming all over the hill in Hollywood to get to your, So it's definitely been frustrating for sure. But that's the nature. That is the typical nature of our industry with time. And so that, that whole working remotely has become a big issue. For some, they don't like the idea because people aren't right there at their fingertips, and others find it much more agreeable to focus and get things done. It all depends on the department and the person within that department. But yeah, these are typical obstacles that are sort of the new issues that are coming up and getting things done. And the bottom line is we always get it done, which is frustrating, because then people go, well, see, you made it happen. So, then they kind of try to take away even more and more of those allowances of time. And it's like,
Do you get the thing where you've been pitted up against the worst possible deadline, worst possible budget, just everything stacked against you. You tell them, look, this is impossible. And then the producer says, I believe you can do it. And then, yes, you get it done. And then they go, see, I told you. And you're like,
yeah, every time. It's the same, look, the wheels have already started turning. The changes are already in place. All that stuff, the dialogue and all that stuff is kind of like, a little bit in vain because they're already married to the idea that it can be done for less. It can be done for less. And so the problem is we're dealing with less and less creatives, like at the top, the executives are coming from liquor companies and tech companies, and they're not really of the design mindset. So whereas you used to have to explain why it takes this long to say a producer or maybe two, now you've got to explain it to a room full of people. And, there's less and less and less creatives involved to help you justify the time you need to do the job you need to do. That'll lead to the AI question is now, we're going to be robbed of that freedom of expression, because now we're always worried about, is it going to be really me that did that? Is that really my work you've taken? And, so it's definitely exasperating when you know that at the end of the day, people still want to have stories told visually. We still will always want films and shows and creativity. That's not going to ever go away, but it's hard to convince those who hold the keys, that have the money. It's hard to convince them that we need more time, or we need more of this, or you know what I mean? It's been tougher and tougher to do that.
Now, looking ahead to the future, your work has been so varied and diverse, from SEAL Team to the Cape. Is there a genre or a particular set that you haven't had a chance to design yet, but you're really looking forward to tackling?
I would have loved to have been in Woman King. Man, I really wanted to do something like that. I was like, wow, look at all that.
That was
look
well
at the
designed.
research. There was a whole historical story there that never came to light. People don't know. So that would be fun. I think that for me would be exciting. It's not so much the Marvel world. I mean, that's kind of, I'm sure that's exciting too. But it's like, again, I always look at things specifically for which type of Marvel film is it, which one of series, because if it involves some really, I love when it ties the future and history at the same time. Like, I love that concept.
Yeah.
Because it's so rich, and it means that you really got to get into the research, always looking for a reason to do some research.
Or retrofuturism.
Exactly. I love it. Yeah. I mean, because it's sort of like I say, you're not really reinventing the wheel. You're doing your best to make it futuristic, but it's still built on, like you go back to Metropolis, the early idea of the future of the urban landscape. And then you see it come back in Blade Runner. You see it come back in Wakanda. You see it come, you see that certain elements come back, And I just watched Logan's Run over the weekend, and it's like, oh, there it is again, So everyone has their stamp on it, but it's like, to have that rich a canvas would be a lot of fun. That would be sort of the cream on the crop for me.
Gattaca is one of my go-tos for that retrofuturism. Gattaca.
Oh, right. Hey, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, there used to be something called the 4:30 movie. It used to come on WABC after come out home from school, and then you'd wait for that 4:30 movie. And they used to show a lot of those, like, really cool, like, quote unquote futuristic movies, and sometimes they go dark, but, there was always an opportunity to see, I think even then it was a seed for me looking at the sets, some of these like really far out, bizarre futuristic movies.
Yeah.
Shelley, this was an absolute blast. I really appreciate you being here. This has been incredibly informative, and we're so glad to hear your background, your story, and everything you've been up to. Could you please tell the people at home, where can they find you? Where can they see what you're up to?
You can certainly look on my Instagram, which is Shell Shocks, and hashtag Shell Shocks. Otherwise, IMDb under Shelley A. Wallace. And I'm working on my website, guys, so stay tuned. And hopefully this will be available on your website.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Shelley. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jake. Logan, it was a pleasure.
Logan, that was an awesome interview.
Shelley's fantastic. I could have listened to her talk for another hour and a half. Like she was phenomenal.
The same here. And it was an absolute thrill getting to know her. I'm so glad we really got to dive into her filmography and the other causes that she really puts her time and energy into. It was really, really incredible.
Yeah. Jake, I'm curious. Where can people find you?
Oh, well, you can find me at VFX2Go and on our website, vfx2go.com, where you can see news, interviews, tips, tutorials all around the VFX industry, and check out more things like that. Logan, where can people find you?
I'm findable. Twitter at FilmGuy89, Instagram and Letterboxd at FilmGuy1989, YouTube for those weekly table reads. Yeah.
Awesome. And did you know we have a website?
I was aware of this fact, yes.
Well, you can find us at HollywoodUnveiled.com and on all the socials at Hollywood Unveiled Podcast. And one of these days, Logan, we'll figure out how to end this show. But until then, I've been Jake.
I've been Logan.
And this has been Hollywood Unveiled.
That feels too clean.
Perfect.